Again, my name is Kim Hunt. I'm the Executive Director of the Pride Action Tank, and I am also the moderator for the next session, and it is the Government Housing Panel. So I'm going to call the names of the individuals who are going to be joining me on the stage, and they can come up as I call their names. Are moving along so fast. I'm just trying to make sure everybody's here. So Ray Willis is Director of the Office of Community Planning and Development at Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. Hi, Ray. And then we have Bill Pluta, Director of Housing and Coordination Services at Illinois Housing Development Authority. There's Bill. And we have Ray, I'm going to mess up your name. Richard Monocchio, Executive Director of Housing Authority of Cook County. Okay. Monocchio. Thank you. Someone just told me. And then next we have Mary Howard from Chicago Housing Authority. I saw her somewhere. Oh, there we go. So what we're going to do is each of them is going to have some opening comments of 3 to 4 minutes or so. And then we are going to have a round of questions and conversation. So should we just go in the order that you're seated? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Ray Willis. Again, I'm with the local Department of Housing and Urban Development, a federal agency. We are primarily the focal point for homelessness in all of the federal government when you look at domestic agencies, aided by another organization called the Interagency Council for the Homeless. But our office has about 4 or 5 different programs collapsed 2 or 3 years ago into something that we call continuum of care. So the way we operate homelessness and the resources that we have is through one of 2 ways. One is an annual competition, and non-for-profit organizations, local governments, county housing authorities, et cetera, are eligible to receive these dollars. Our budget for this, that Congress appropriated, is probably close to about $2 billion. What comes to this state, and then eventually into Chicago, is roughly about $110, $115 million spread out all over the state. Chicago and the metro area receives a lion's share of those dollars. And it's for a variety of homeless programs. Housing on the one hand, and then services on the other. And many organizations, some of which are here today, are recipients of those dollars from our office. We fund probably 450 projects throughout the state. And again, the majority of those projects are in the city of Chicago, again, ranging from services to, on the one hand, to actual housing and rental assistance and leasing on the other. The services, we have service providers. Most of them, probably some of which are in this room here, provide services ranging from substance abuse to mental health counseling and to other types of basic living, job counseling, and other types of services that, life skills that are so often needed. Now, when it comes to youth, we have a number of agencies that are receiving our dollars for youth all over the state, and specifically in this metro area of Chicago particularly. So the funds are there. And are there enough funds? Probably not. Are our agencies doing as much as they can? Probably not. Are we at HUD doing as much as we can? Probably not. So it does pave the way for a lot more opportunity for us to be collaboratively working together to be able to respond, be more responsive to this whole area and issue of homelessness. We are looking at probably a similar budget for the ensuing fiscal year, meaning the next fiscal year, 2017. And we're in the process now of allocating our resources. Again, to Chicago, we're probably looking at somewhere close to in excess of $60 million coming into Chicago currently as it relates to the current fiscal year or 2015 fiscal year funding. And with that, again, the same agencies will be receiving these dollars. Most of the money that we're going to be, that Congress has appropriated, and will be allocated down to the local level, is renewal, for the renewal of existing projects. So we don't have a lot of opportunity because of the budget constraints to be able to take on new projects. But for the monies that Congress does appropriate, most of those, about 95% of those dollars, are to renew existing projects. And again, projects falling in this state, about 450, of which a lion's share of those are within the city of Chicago for services as well as for housing. We do offer and is available to each individual organization and continuum of care jurisdiction technical assistance, and that's another major piece that we provide. Technical assistance. Some of it comes from my office with my staff, but a good portion of it comes from what we call national technical assistance contractors that we pay. We have a budgeted amount of monies that we pay to actually hire consultants and contractors to go out on a specific case-by-case basis and provide technical assistance to an organization, non-for-profit agency, to a local government, or both, to deal with agency-specific issues, to deal with issues that's related to the local jurisdiction in terms of designing systems and programs to fill gaps within an existing organizational arrangement within a locality. So we've been at this for since 1987, the federal government. When I say we, not so much HUD, yes, but the federal government in general, with the passage of the Stuart B. McKinney Homeless Assistance Act, which created about 17 different programs at the federal level. Now, you guys were dealing with homelessness even before that time, but I'm talking about the federal government's responsiveness to homelessness came about in 1987. We've been operating this now for, almost 30 years? And we've seen a whole shift of how things were being done then to how things are being done now. And a lot of that shift has come about because we've gotten better in terms of understanding, first of all, collecting data, and then having to make our policy and decisions that are based on evidence, evidence-based policy. And so with the data that you collect and our organizations collect that we fund, we use that to begin to shape and form the policies that drive and direct the kind of programs that we have, the criteria for those programs in terms of how they are to operate, and thus being able to deal with issues related to homelessness. Most recently being this past 4 or 5 months, our primary goal, ending homelessness in this past year, was to end veteran homelessness by December 31st of 2015. In this state, we had one city that made a declaration that yes, indeed, they had ended veteran homelessness, and that was the city of Rockford, Illinois. Not to say that other cities throughout the state, Chicago included, weren't working towards that goal. That was a national goal, the administration goal, HUD's goal, and one city in this state made that goal, accomplished that, the city of Rockford. There were several other states around the country that were able to make that same declaration, but at least in this state, Rockford was. Secondarily, we had ending chronic homelessness as a goal for 2017. And so the programs that we fund, the policies governing those programs will aid and abet those projects that we fund and the funding that is going to be put out there to deal with addressing the issue of ending chronic homelessness, particularly among families as a priority, and then secondarily, youth. So with that, I will pass the mic on to my...
Right. Thank you.
That's right. Good afternoon. I feel like we sort of have the death spot up here. We're after lunch and we're government, so bear with us. Once again, my name is Mary Howard. I have the pleasure to serve as the Chief Resident Service Officer for the Chicago Housing Authority, and my role up here today will just be to inform you a little overview of what we do, but not get into any of the dialogue regarding our state of fiscal hoarding that was mentioned a little bit ago. We are the second largest housing authority in North America. We are the affordable housing provider and owner for over 62,000 families in the city of Chicago. Most of those are through our Section 8 program, where we have about 46,000 individuals, families, seniors living in in the market through a housing choice voucher. When I was thinking about this summit, it was important to put it in the context that this is mostly focused around youth homelessness, 18 to 24. So I did a little bit of analytics on our current wait list. So if you don't know, we opened up our wait list in 2014. That was the first time since 2010. And we had, in a month's period time, over 220,000 applicants. What we do once people are on our wait list is then they go through a randomization for the lottery to actually be on the wait list. We have 3 wait lists, one for public housing, one for housing choice voucher, and then one for our project-based voucher program, which we call the property rental assistance. So in each of those 3 lotteries, it was very interesting when I looked at who was on our wait list from the 18 to 24-year-old population. And throughout each of these 3 wait lists, 16% were 18 to 24. Pretty significant. I further then filtered for a self-report of homelessness, 25% across the board. So clearly, we have youth homelessness in our population on our wait lists. In a little bit, once we get into the questions that are proposed, we can talk about a couple of things that we do regarding addressing homelessness and then our potential role in tiny homes. So thank you, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Pluta. I'm with the government, and I'm here to help you. Okay. In all seriousness, we really are. I'm with the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA, as many of you know us by. IDA's been around since 1967. We were created as sort of a they like to call it a quasi-governmental agency. So we're actually a public corporation. So when we do something good, we're a state agency. When we do something bad, we're a quasi-public organization. Anyway, there was a lot of discussion just earlier, the sessions before us about SROs. IDA has probably participated in just about every SRO development in Chicago. We worked a lot with Lakefront SRO in their earlier years. We worked with Mercy Lakefront SRO. We've worked with Thresholds. We've worked with Heartland Housing and numerous other nonprofit organizations that serve the homeless and persons with disabilities. We've also worked very closely with Corporation for Supportive Housing. I saw Katrina Van Valkenburg here. I worked with Betsy Benito, their state director, so they've been a great technical assistance provider for helping organize being able to produce affordable housing for homeless persons out in the real world. Just a few items. Illinois Housing Development Authority is the state's lead agency for our HUD housing plan, known as the Consolidated Plan. We're also the lead agency for a state-mandated housing plan. And in both of these, homeless and at-risk homeless persons are one of the top priorities, as well as preservation being another one. So we've been sort of tuned into that for quite a while. Since 2008, and I should mention probably when people think of IDA, sometimes the first thing they think of is tax credits. The low-income housing tax credit program is by far our most popular, oversubscribed, beneficial program for developing affordable housing. Without getting into a lot of detail, it's just very highly sought after. And so one of the ways that IDA tries to influence policy or implement policy, such as trying to reach homeless populations, is through the tax credit program. And every year we have to come up with this document called the Qualified Allocation Plan, or since we're in government, you know, everything's got to have an acronym, so it's the QAP. So every year we go through that, but within the scoring process for that, we've built in a number of areas to incentivize developers. One is to build permanent supportive housing. Another is for those projects that have rental assistance tied to them, so they could reach the lower income households that need affordable housing. We also have what's called our statewide referral network. And under this provision, any developer that sets aside at least 10% of their housing units in their proposed project for homeless or at-risk homeless persons or persons with disabilities is rewarded through the point award process of the scoring. And so most of our projects end up doing that. And so as a result, we literally have thousands of those units now available, and we have sort of a centralized wait list that we've developed to deal with that. There's other things I want to talk about when we get more to the barriers part, but I just wanted to also say on the development side, I know there was some reference made earlier to vacant properties. IDA actually administers two different types of those programs right now. We have the abandoned properties program and the blight reduction program. And in both of these, it allows municipalities, and with blight reduction, their nonprofit partners, to acquire, demolish, redevelop properties that have been vacant or gone into foreclosure. So very often those are very good resources for especially nonprofits that are looking for properties to develop at a lower cost, and very often those properties are available at much lower than market rates, so it really helps decrease the cost of the project development. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to my partner in crime here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Hi, everybody. My name is Rich Monocchio. I'm the director of the Cook County Housing Authority. I have had the pleasure of working with the folks up here on a lot of good projects, and it is a great group. And I have to say, I'm very excited about what is going on here today. I very impressed by the innovativeness and the energy around this issue. And we all go to a lot of these things all over the state, and some of us all over the country. And I have to say that this is very inspiring. And we want to, very inspiring. And it got me thinking about a lot of different things this morning, about what we can do. Excuse me. But one thing I want to say to start is, Bill and Ida, they really are a truly great state housing finance agency. And Ray, who I worked with at HUD for many, many years, they do a great job at HUD administering what they have. But I don't have the same constraints that some of the folks up here have. I used to be at HUD. I used to be at the city. I worked for a member of Congress. So I've seen this on all different levels. And what we're hearing up here and what is that, resources are an issue. We've heard it in many different ways, and it's true. Only 1 in 4 people that need housing assistance receive it. The TDC to build new housing is so high. We don't have enough vouchers for folks. We just don't have enough. But I think we need to take a step back and think just for a minute. And I actually talked about this a few weeks ago to a lot of business people and philanthropists at the City Club of Chicago, and I'm going to keep talking about it until hopefully something happens. Nobody wants to talk about, people don't like to talk about the tax code because it's complicated, and I'm certainly not going to get into a long discussion of it here. But one part of the tax code, and that's directly related to housing, is a mortgage interest deduction. And it's, we all love it. The people that own houses love it. I love it because you get a tax break. But the fact is, the value of that deduction is 3 times as much as the HUD budget, about $150 billion to $42 billion. And 80% of the MID goes to those in the top 20%. So if you want to talk about what our housing policy is in this country, it's a mortgage interest deduction. But I would argue that the need is so great here, and we have to reshift our priorities and really, as advocates, say that is not good public policy. And I think we're hearing some of this politically now, and hopefully it'll resonate, because some of that money needs to come here. So that's my little political comment. I'm not, like I said, I'm not as constrained as I used to be, so I can say that. We're the housing authority for the suburbs, and we also have done a lot of things in the last few years to address homelessness specifically, because homeless people have been underrepresented when it comes to public housing and vouchers. There's no question about it. So as we get into our discussions, I will get into that a little more. Thank you.
So you can keep the mic. So Richard, you left us at a great place. Let's talk about more specifically, and some of you have kind of given us a top level discussion about this, but what now are your agencies doing to provide services for folks who are experiencing homelessness, particularly youth? And for those of you who have been around for a little while, how have those policies changed over the years?
Well, I guess I'll start out as sort of the odd man out here. IDA is the state's housing finance agency. We basically do not fund or administer direct services programs. I would state, however, very strongly, to sort of complement Mr. Monocchio's comments here, the major need for rental assistance for homeless and other special needs populations. It's so critical to it happening. And also the services, especially the ones that Mr. Willis spoke about earlier, most of the residents that live in IDA-assisted permanent supportive housing receive those homeless services through the local services provider. Mm-hmm. So it's a very important ingredient to making their housing stability successful. There's a prohibition when you have HUD funding that you cannot condition the tenancy of a unit that they have to receive services. So it's still voluntary, but it's been very successful in terms of how it's played out in the properties that we operate.
Mm-hmm.
For CHA, one of the things that we've done a few years ago was to increase the ability that we have to project-based units for vouchers. What that's enabled us to do is to have development companies come to us and have tenant-specific housing. But we also realized through some of our dialogue with advocates and service providers that we needed to do something more. Just recently, we started to sponsor base some of those vouchers, and Jerry and Flora back there are nodding their head like, yeah, you're right, we made you do that, Mary Howard. So what that does, though, is that it enables social service providers to project-based units through a master leasing. And so they're not on the hook for development of units. But then we were also concerned about the absence of social service dollars as they continue to shrink in our state. And so we actually partnered with the Department of Family and Support Services. Commissioner Morrison Butler was here earlier but had to leave, where they dedicated specific social service funding that they had a request for proposals for earlier this year. And then once they have selected their providers, then they will come to us to get sponsor-based vouchers. And we've done this in a way that HUD allows us to without having to go to our wait list. So this is going to let the social service agency actually tell us who they are going to be housing. So this is one way that I think utilizing the flexibilities that we have, not to get too technical, but Chicago Housing Authority is what's called a Move to Work program. There's several of these throughout the country, and it enables the PHA to take a look at policies and figure out if there are adjustments that need to be made and to kind of try pilot things. So we're trying a re-entry program now with Safer Foundation and St. Leonard's. And so we will continue to do some of these pilot programs to see if there are things that work. The other thing that is successful and not heavily utilized, but we work with the Corporation for Supportive Housing to develop a moving on plan. And so people that are in our project-based housing are they're able to get a voucher or request a tenant-based voucher after they're there for a period of time. And so freeing up a permanent supportive housing slot allows someone else to go into it while the person who no longer needs the assistance can move out into market rate. And so that is one example of how we need to better, I think, create a more continuum of housing to address people's needs as they develop after they receive services or no longer need the same type of subsidized housing.
Thank you. So that we're not as lucky as the CHA because we don't have the moving to work status. So technically we can't be as creative, but we have found a way within the rules that exist today to do some pretty creative things. One of the things that Mary finished on that I want to talk about is working with the Coalition for the Homeless and a lot of the service providers, temporary housing service providers. We created this program called Flow, and it's just as Mary said, you have a lot of people who go through the transitionary housing period from homelessness for 6 months or 12 months, and then they're ready, probably even working. But then what? The housing's too expensive. So we have actually housed 75 formerly homeless people through our housing voucher program. So they leave the permanent supportive housing and then move into the neighborhood community. And they get a voucher, and hopefully they will become self-sufficient so that voucher gets to be used by somebody else. But the point was that Mary made too is it opens up the supportive housing that's in such great need for people who need it. So that's a really, and the advocates deserve a lot of credit for coming to us with that program. There's a couple other ones that are exciting too. We were able to build actually we provide the rental assistance to a permanent housing for homeless people with kids in Country Club Hills. So that's where we provide the project-based vouchers, attach it to the site, and services are on site. And again, the idea is hopefully that folks will transition out, and a lot do. But again, because of the high cost of housing, it creates a real barrier in many cases. We heard Ray talk about veterans housing and the need to eliminate veterans homelessness, which is, I have to say the federal government has really put an emphasis on that. We helped Hines build a 72-unit permanent housing at the site at Hines. And we house about 450 formerly homeless veterans through our voucher program in the community. One thing that as it relates though to youth, we have to do better in this area. So some of the things that we are doing and will do, for example, we created a homeless preference, first of all, in all of our waiting lists, which is important. So that pertains to youth and to adults. That basically means you move up on the list. I just started a program with the South Suburban School Districts to set aside 100 vouchers for families with kids who are homeless. Not enough is being done in that area as well. That is just starting. I look forward to reporting on its progress in the near future, but it's an exciting program because it's a population we can't forget about. And this is really, this is new. It just was part of some legislation that was, I think, just this year in the appropriations bill. But the housing authorities run a program called the Family Unification Program. The whole idea is So if you had a situation where you lost your kids because of some lack of housing or some in the judicial system, whatever, we actually provide vouchers to reunite families or help foster families. But then what happens to the kid when he's 18? So there's a new program that HUD approved that's going to allow us to extend those vouchers for 5 years. So instead of having an 18-year-old who ages out of the system, we'll be able to help that young person with a voucher for 5 more years and hopefully get them on their feet so they can live independently.
Thank you. Oh yeah, Ray. Forgot about you, Ray.
So I'm sitting here being reminded, one of our earlier programs that we funded at the federal or at HUD's, our level, since the passage of the McKinney Act in 89, 87 with the demonstration in 89, fully funding about 17 different programs, is a local group called Heartland Alliance now. But then it was called it was called Travelers and Immigrants Aid. Any of you familiar with TIA, Travelers and Immigrants Aid? I see Flora Koppel. She may have even worked at one time. But Travelers and Immigrants Aid received funding from HUD to deal with something that they called, the project name was called Neon Street Center for Youth. So in the earlier stages of the McKinney funding, the City of Chicago, through TIA, now Heartland Alliance, was able to recognize the importance and the issue and the problem of youth homelessness and made a response. And that program is still going on today, as I understand it. It is still in existence today, Neon Street Center for Youth. So leading up to now and referring back to then, we've seen a lot of change at the federal level, at HUD's level, in terms of the programs that we're funding. And I said before, it's been pretty much based on what you tell us and what we learn by your experiences, by way of your running the programs. We've moved much more towards evidence-based policies governing our programs. A lot of services were provided in the earlier days of the federal response to homelessness. Today, we see more of our resources at HUD going into housing. We're not de-emphasizing services, but we're putting more dollars into this whole notion of housing, leasing or rental assistance. The other thing, which is I think equally important, that over the years we've evolved to the point of now giving deference to the local community, or saying to the local community, you decide on what your priorities are. We have priorities, but within those, you need to decide and tell us at HUD what projects you're recommending for funding. Again, with the backdrop of, yes, priority consideration for housing and then services. We are a housing agency, and that's what we do. Now, you can argue and debate how well at times we do that, but we are a housing agency. And we would hope at least, that we would find many of you looking to other federal agencies, whether it's the Department of Health and Human Services, and they do fund a lot of social service programs. Labor Department, Education Department, all of those agencies, domestic agencies, have programs and services for the homeless. And we would like to think that the more you can tap into those are mainstream programs, the better you're going to be able to then respond to your homeless population, particularly when it comes to receiving funding from us for housing. So again, that is our main and focal point at this point in time, housing. Driving our grantees to come into us for resources for housing. But if you need services, yes, they're still there. But our greatest priority is that of housing, whether it's for youth, whether it's for vets, whether it's for chronic homeless individuals, whomever, but it's housing.
Okay, so let's talk about housing. So we're here to talk about tiny homes in particular today. And I would like to know from you, given this is the government panel, what are some of the challenges you see in implementing tiny homes, either through your agencies or in the communities that you serve? And along with that, what role do you see for tiny homes in terms of taking care of any gaps in the housing sector that you see?
I don't know that HUD has a policy that's anti-tiny homes. I think there are research data out there. There are policies around whether something is a mobile home versus or a recreational vehicle. So it's not so much a tiny homes focus. We don't have that. We are still grappling with housing and our existing housing with a lot of billions of dollars going out maybe 6-7 years ago in terms of the administration for addressing the issue of foreclosure and abandonment. So we had a plethora of billions of dollars funded down to local communities like Chicago to use those dollars to, again, acquire and reposition those foreclosed and abandoned properties into some use. Chicago did a very good job. Cook County had resources, they did a very good job, working with some of you as service providers to be able to go out and to obtain the resources that we had to acquire and then repurpose those abandoned and foreclosed properties. And so with that, that we do know that there is a housing stock out there. Issues with them, yes. That is unused, foreclosed, or abandoned, yes. And it's still a continuing kind of process that we're grappling with. So I think as it relates to tiny homes, we're not saying that you should or you shouldn't have tiny homes. We know that we have an existing array of programs at HUD, housing included, used to focus on the issue of homelessness, be it youth or veteran or family. It's probably good to see yet another potential resource or potential venue or potential strategy to deal with the issue of homelessness as it relates to tiny homes. I think the more options you have, perhaps the better we will have to be able to address this whole notion of homelessness in general.
Thank you.
Bring it. I just want to see if you're listening. Clearly there's, gaps in having affordable housing. I think tiny homes is, fairly new. It was certainly new to me, other than HGTV, but as a potential resource. So I think it's really exciting, and I am really happy to be here. I did a little research on, in terms of whether or not we can project-based voucher tiny homes, and it's yes, assuming it passes HQS, which is the Housing Quality Standard. So I think it would be a really neat opportunity if any developer is going to set up trying to do a tiny homes community and talk with us around if that's a potential operating subsidy support. So I think it's really interesting.
Yes! That's what I really wanted to hear.
Well, before I came here this morning, I had a conversation with our chief architect at IDA, because I remember us having a very long loan committee meeting one day about the square footage of SROs. And so out of that developed some concrete policy, no pun intended, regarding square footage. And just to give you some figures, for efficiency apartments and IDA's building standards, we allow a minimum of 300 square feet for new construction. For rehab, it's 250 square feet. Again, these are minimums. SROs, there's a bit of an exception in that they have to have one habitable room, and it has to be at least 180 to 250 square feet. So I think the tiny homes model can fit within those confines, even if it doesn't. Again, talking with our architect, he said that we can make exceptions if they can make the case for the need for it. So I wanted to mention that just so that put people at ease in terms of its eligibility. The one area I do need to mention, though, is that IDA can only fund permanent housing, so we cannot fund emergency shelters or transitional housing. So as long as the property has the ability to have a lease with the tenants, in the obvious terms, then that's not a problem. I just jotted down a few other items regarding challenges, and some of these aren't necessarily IDAs, but they certainly can be for someone trying to develop this kind of housing. The first one is building codes. Some of you heard, I think, earlier conversations about some of the difficulties that can cause. Also zoning ordinances. In either or both of these cases, they could restrict the ability to build an additional housing unit on an existing property. This is more of a suburban issue than it is in Chicago, I think. I bring that up because back several years ago, this even became an issue with what they called granny flats. And so even building housing for your elderly parent or relative became an issue because of local zoning and building restrictions. The other thing I think Richard mentioned, and we're certainly in agreement with, is there's always a lack of funding. And regardless of how efficient you are in administering your programs, there's just an unbelievable amount of demand than there is supply out there. So that's just sort of a constant battle. Someone mentioned earlier the security and utility deposit issue. That continues to be a concern. With some of these court consent decrees that we're dealing with for Americans with Disabilities Act, that's actually been solved through some supplemental funding, but that still remains to be a big issue for persons even coming out of shelters or permanent supportive housing. A couple other items: the high cost of building in many of our communities, and also a couple areas that we're looking at IDA over the last couple of years, again mostly through our low-income housing tax credit program, are trying to encourage development in what we call opportunity areas, as well as community revitalization areas. So we not only want to try to build housing where the jobs and the transportation are more plentiful, but we also don't want to abandon the projects we've done within lower income areas, so that as long as there's an ongoing community revitalization effort that can be documented, we can still consider those kinds of projects.
So with respect specifically to tiny homes, so I was the building commissioner in Chicago, so made changes to the code, administered the code, and also at housing and buildings, dealt with the zoning code. Huge, I don't want to use the word impediment, because I think the people in this room are pretty good advocates and will probably be able to convince my successors, some of whom I think are going to be up here after us, to allow the concept. But it is a huge impediment. Mary would welcome the project or two in the CHA. We would also welcome this. Developers coming to us, or us actually even working with developers or architects. The one difference is, though, Ray, we might need a waiver from you guys. You see, we don't have all the flexibility, so I do believe we are probably constrained by square footage requirements in terms of providing some subsidy, for example, to the particular unit or the tiny homes development. But I think that's not insurmountable, and I think it'd be a great thing and the examples we saw earlier all over the country, just very inspiring. We need to do that here. Thank you.
Well, that is an awesome note to end on because we are at the end of the session. So let's think again. Hold on.
Again, the tiny homes, although we don't call them tiny homes, but if you do a little bit of just research, you will find that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, years ago, and even I think probably today, were building and did build, they didn't call them tiny homes, but they were very small homes on Indian reservations. They did that. And it might be well to kind of take a look at how small they were. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, through its Farmers Home Administration Rural Development, even to this day, is building tiny homes, not in terms of how you are defining it here, but they were small, as little as 800 square feet. Now, 800 square feet is probably twice as large as what you're looking at and talking about here, but they're small. And what I'm saying is that they moved into jurisdictions, communities, primarily in the rural landscape and on Indian reservations, native reservations, but they were there and they're there now. And so, again, I would just encourage that continue to do your research, to look to see what other communities are doing, jurisdictions are doing, other funding agencies are doing as it relates to housing, particularly Farmers Home Administration, USDA, and then the Bureau of Indian Affairs, how they're addressing it, and you might find some interesting data there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. So now we're done, right? Thank you so much to our panel. That was wonderful information, and it's great to know that there's some support here in government agencies for tiny homes. So thank you all for joining us today and after lunch.